In 1980, Americans spent $3.3 billion playing video games. That's more money than the total combined budgets for the cities of Chicago, Boston, Washington, Dallas, and Cincinnati last year.
It's the video game years, and this is 1980. The systems, the culture, the games.
1980 is here, finally! Thank you.
The arcades blow up from a missile attack.
And it's global thermonuclear war, and it's awesome.
Nintendo gives us games that tell time.
Nintendo Game & Watch, that's pocket power.
And a computer game company bursts onto the scene.
The point of a computer game was to hurt you, to challenge you, to leave you stumped for a long period of time.
Plus, Pac-Man fever. And we're going berserk. So watch out for spiders and avoid the grooves. This is 1980.
Next level.
Pac-Man? Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, I remember it. Just seemed inane to me.
So 1980 comes. Pac-Man bursts onto the scene.
The arcade game Pac-Man was developed by Namco and licensed to Midway in 1980. It came out at a time when the most popular games were space shooters and of course more Pong clones.
But then Pac-Man comes along and essentially creates a whole new genre.
It was the first game with a cutscene, the first game with power-ups. It established the maze genre, and it's gone on to influence many games even today.
Some of the first cutscenes, I remember the chase, and that was like some of the first memorable music, I think, that really that people remembered.
For the first time, you have a character that, wow, that's Pac-Man. That's not the Space Invader guy or the asteroid ship. That's Pac-Man. He's a cute little character that I adore.
The creator of Pac-Man was heavily inspired by American cartoons. The Power Pellets, for example, were heavily inspired by Popeye's spinach.
The creation of the Pac-Man character was actually really fitting because the game designer Toru Iwatani partially came up with the idea while eating a pizza. He removed a slice of pizza and bam, there he was, Pac-Man.
Well, that's more myth than truth. Pac-Man is actually based around the Japanese character for mouth, which is Ku-Chi, and it's a square, but Iwatani just rounded out the square.
Pac-Man was huge. I mean, it was just a tremendous success, and it was also crossing over gender, where guys and girls were playing it and having a lot of fun with it.
Wouldn't it be cool if I were to create a game that the guys and the girls would want to play together? And really what he thought was, wouldn't it be cool if I could create a game where the girl says to the guy, oh, that looks so cute, like, I want to go play this, and then she drags him over there. And then now we're getting money from both of them, right?
Pac-Man was so successful because it was a brand new kind of game that appealed to both genders.
This was not the most politically correct thing to think at the time, but he thought to himself, what do girls like doing? Well, they like desserts and they like eating, so we're going to make this game called Pac-Man about eating food and eating delicious looking desserts, and everything's gonna be cute, bright colors.
Pac-Man comes from the term paku paku, which is, I guess, automatopoeia for opening one's mouth and closing one's mouth in Japanese.
That initial name was changed into Puck-Man because, it's kind of like a puck with a mouth. Sure, why not? Looks nice on the side of an arcade cabinet. But when it came to America, they decided to change that name to Pac-Man because Puck-Man could be vandalized into something not so PG.
Then you have F***Man.
I wasn't gonna say it, but making it F***Man. Man.
No. We would never think like that.
Never.
When you heard the word puck, you never want to automatically associate it with the word
Ruckman? Ruckman? Doesn't even make sense. I don't know why they... What? An F?
Not just your character, but your enemies had personalities. Blinky, Inky, Pinky, and Clyde.
They all reacted differently.
They had their own AI.
That was the key to being good at the game.
Once you go past 256 levels, the game breaks. You cannot play anymore. That's kill screen.
It goes half Berzerko, where you can't play it anymore. It's essentially the kill screen, but it's not really the kill screen. It's just a big glitch.
Therefore, it is possible to play a perfect game of Pac-Man, where you can get the maximum number of points. And people have done that.
Yeah, Billy Mitchell at FunSpot did the very first and only perfect Pac-Man game, which is every power pellet, every energizer, every pellet, every ghost that turns blue, every point you can get, every special item. How is that possible? But the guy did it.
Pac-Man was so huge and popular for the first time ever. You had video game merchandising on a grand scale.
In the 80s, Pac-Man was everywhere. He was on t-shirts, cereal boxes, mugs, glasses.
There was even a Pac-Man video game.
He got his own animated cartoon series. He even got a top 10 music single.
Pac-Man fever.
Oh, Pac-Man fever.
I got Pac-Man fever. Pac-Man fever. I'm going out of my mind. Going out of my mind.
Pac-Man was considered the very first video game mascot, if you will. This is before Mario, before Donkey Kong, before Sonic, before Duke Nukem. I mean, you had Pac-Man in the early Duke Nukem. Isn't that the guy's name?
Pac-Man with the mouth open. That's like a universal icon for video games.
It's just kind of weird that you would throw in Duke Nukem with all these other...
Pac-Man has gone through that whole genre past Mario, and they're still making Pac-Man games, and they're making really good ones to this day.
Even 30 plus years later, everyone across the world virtually in the modern world knows who Pac-Man is. So you have what's called a franchise, video game franchise. Pac-Man was the first.
He's the Pac-Man. He did it.
Welcome to Club Atari. What's your pleasure? Break out? Ah, here's something new. Circus Atari.
Cartridges, video chess, football. Cartridge, sir? Fez is here.
We meet again, Fez.
Yes, a little game of Space Invaders, perhaps? What shall we play for?
For fun, of course.
No other company offers you as many different video game cartridges as Atari.
Arcade Break. Monaco GP by Sega, a very early racing game.
The game sound effects are really kind of realistic, actually. You know, when you hear your car pass other cars, you hear the vroom.
The noise, the unrelenting noise was a bit of an annoyance.
The tachometer on the actual cabinet would actually rev up as the faster you go, which was really neat, and had light up dials and stuff like that.
It's awesome when they put actual electromechanical functions into arcade cabinets.
Yeah, I mean, and that was early. This is 80, and they're doing stuff like this.
You know, as far as racing games go, it's fine. You're weaving in and out on this road, going by and trying to avoid crashing into other guys.
Have you played Atari today?
This is Andy Leonard at the 1980 Atari Games. Lots of excitement here. Stiff competition in basketball. They have the jump on Skydiver. The human cannonball can't miss.
This is where the key moment in video games kind of comes in, is that you can have the greatest system in the world, but it's the game that people want, the killer app. That's what you have to have. You have a great system like the Sega Dreamcast. If you don't come up with a game, the people have to get that system. It can be a great system, people aren't going to buy it, it's not going to fly. So the Atari 2600, the problem was, it was good, it had some great games and everything like that, but it didn't have that one that everybody wanted.
1980 is when it explodes. Boom!
And this was the boom year.
Why? Space Invaders. It gets Space Invaders, one of the biggest arcade games of all time, and certainly the biggest at the time, on a home console.
And for the first time, Space Invaders.
Like, we could play Space Invaders at home?
So bringing that game over to North America was just, it ranks up there as like some of the smartest decisions ever made in video game history.
It quadrupled their sales, and it put Atari on the map as one of the fastest growing companies ever in the history of ever.
Suddenly, everybody's got to have an Atari, right? And the cool thing is, for Atari that all of the games that they already had out, the current library, well, suddenly all these games are flying off the shelf now too. So games that have already been out and have already been sitting on the shelf suddenly start getting sold just because everybody now owns the Atari so they could play Space Invaders and they want some other games to play.
And now they're really starting to get their feet wet and putting out games. They had Adventure in '79, and they have some other fun games that came out in '80, like Fishing Derby, where you fish.
Bob Whitehead, who had pioneered making larger objects, like his boxers, stepped over and he said, you know, I could make you a shark for the top level. And that's what really turned it into a game, where the shark had like AI and he would go after your fish and you had to figure out a way to beat him.
And you have boxing, which is an overhead like this. It's like this.
It looks
Deal with me, Bean.
It looks like two crabs fighting.
Two crabs
basically
fighting.
what it is. Two angry crabs in a ring.
It basically was what won them that first console war. Okay, that and Fishing Derby. See, it's little known fact. There's one guy that worked at Atari the whole time. It wasn't Nolan Bushnell, it was Mr. Atari. That's who the company was named after. And he was working in like this magical shop of wonders, and you know, someone would say, I would like to buy a game. And he would say, oh, okay, let me come up with the game. And he would, you know, take his little pen and he would sketch out the circuit board and then wave a magic wand and then poof, the circuit board would come alive with little magical elves that would ting, 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 conk, 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 conk. And they would code in there the game itself to Mr. Atari specifications. And then after about, 3 milliseconds, because elves work fast, man. Poof, they would have the game. There's the game right there. And he would, oh, Space Invaders. I shall sell this and make $1 trillion until Warner Communications buys me out and runs me into the ground. And that is the true story of Atari. Let no one else tell you different. What was I talking about?
Pinball of 1980.
Ian here with the popular pinball machines of 1980. Firepower by Williams, a classic Steve Ritchie playfield full of flow, a fake Death Star, and the first solid-state multi-ball. Xenon by Bailey, a great ramp shot, a beautiful machine, and it moans when you put quarters in. How can you beat that? Black Hole by Gottlieb, first ever use of a sunken, reversed playfield, and it breaks down all the time. And those were the popular pinball machines of 1980, because there's more to life than video games.
Continue. Atari, the leader in coin-operated video games, presents Centipede.
Centipede from Atari is a brilliant game in every possible way. For starters, it's a great-looking arcade machine. It's got a wonderful control scheme with the trackball and the fire button. It's a lot of fun, it's intense, and it never gets old. It's got that perfect arcade-style risk versus reward scoring system.
What I always thought was interesting about Centipede was that how smoothly it would keep transitioning. It would almost never let up. You'd have the short, screen in between when you beat the level, then all of a sudden it restarts, just the color's different. You keep going and going.
Instead of like a whole fleet of ships or something that was coming at you, it was a centipede, a long centipede insect. And of course there were those little mushrooms scattered around the screen, and every time it would hit one of those, that would make it come down a level and start going.
Mushrooms played a big part in Centipede. If you shot away sections of the centipede, they'd turn into mushrooms that you could then blast out of the way. And if a scorpion poisoned a mushroom and a centipede ran into it, it would change their behavior. Far out, man.
The game was designed by Ed Long and Donna Bailey. Now, Donna Bailey, of course, was one of the very few female video game designers at this time, so that was something kind of special for this. And just like Pac-Man before it, Centipede had this cool thing going on where it was appealing to both genders.
You, once again, in 1980, start to see the broadening of the appeal of video games. It's not just teenage boys in darkly lit rooms anymore. These are things that everyone has some sort of interest in.
In fact, females were very prominently playing Centipede. I don't know what it was about this game, but the ladies loved it.
Bailey used a lot of pastel colors in Centipede. Lime green, pink, orange. And a lot of women played Centipede. They were very attracted to the game. And some people think the use of pastel colors is the reason why.
So what exactly is the story for Centipede? I have no clue. You're this little thing shooting these centipedes that are aliens. What are they exactly?
That's kind of what the cabinet art looked like. The centipedes looked like these grotesque space mutant things. Centipedes are freaking gross anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
The cover art for the Atari 5200 version and later versions of Centipede show a young boy who looks like he's in the woods with some sort of wand.
From what I understand, you were supposed to be a little elf shooting magic out of a wand to protect your garden from centipedes.
Come on, we'll share your tomatoes and your celery. What the hell?
He's like Willow.
Yeah.
Sort of. Not really.
It's just a wonderful game. I'm gonna go play Centipede right now.
Centipede, you can't run away. You can't run away.
Arcade break.
Battlezone was a first-person vector-based tank simulator.
Kind of, in a way, a sequel to Tank, which was, Key Games / Atari.
Essentially one of the, if not the first, kind of 3D looking games.
Much like Space Invaders, it uses colored gels to color the vector graphics.
There was different versions of this cabinet. The primary version had like almost a periscope type controls.
You're looking in the scope and you're just in this tank and you have to move around and fight another tank.
With the Battlezone arcade game, my least favorite part, while it was the coolest part, was the periscope mask thing. Right. But it's also a place where you get to press your face into a disgusting zone where other pimply-faced, disgusting humans are pressed their faces.
Yeah, and there was definitely some pus on those things. You need to come up with some cleaning wipes.
Always kind of smelled like spit and feet.
Battlezone was unique in that it depicted pretty realistic tank warfare. In fact, so realistic, the military wanted to use it for training purposes, and they actually got a version of the game developed for them.
I would hate to think that there was a generation of what would they be called? Tank commandos? I don't know, that sounds like a video gaming term. Hey, you tank commandos, approach your Battlezone machine, it's time for training. That's horrifying.
An adventure beyond your wildest imagination. Sierra Online introduces a whole new dimension in software entertainment.
Sierra Online, 1980, the breakout year, founded by a couple, 2 people only, Ken and Roberta Williams, and Sierra go on to become the largest computer game company.
Now, Ken Williams, the founder of the company, was actually working on a Fortran compiler for the Apple II home computer. And when he wasn't doing that, his wife Roberta was playing text adventures on the thing. A woman after my own heart.
The company that made them online systems later went on to become Sierra Online, so they were sort of a big deal.
Their first major release as online was Mystery House.
Where you were in a house with mystery. A Victorian house, which they're all mysterious, so kind of redundant house.
Which is an Infocom style text adventure, but it actually has graphics.
Visuals!
Right.
And at some point or another she realized, hey, why the crap don't these things have graphics? Text adventures, graphics, Apple II, graphics. Makes sense. But nobody was doing it.
Mystery House and Wizard and the Princess both were sort of the first graphical adventures that's debated on the internet. Please don't write me letters.
You can see the room, and no longer are you limited to your boring old imagination, but you can actually see the pictures as you progress.
And there was a murderer in the house killing people. That's what murderers do, one by one. So it's your job to make sure that the murderer doesn't kill everyone. Find out who they are. Do all that gumshoe stuff.
Now, I'm going to admit I don't like Sierra games that much because they're very rooted in a specific time in the computer gaming era where the point of a computer game was to hurt you, to challenge you, to leave you stumped for a long period of time. And it started with Mystery House, which wasn't that difficult, but eventually Sierra spawned an entire legacy of very difficult games.
To me, the greatest thing about Sierra is that Mystery House was very influential, according to the creators of Dragon Quest, in creating Dragon Quest.
And then they went on to do The Wizard and the Princess, which added color, and they very quickly realized that graphics would be a selling point to a large chunk of their audience.
Where there was a kingdom of Serenia, and the princess had been stolen, taken away, off somewhere. You're a random passerby who was chosen to be valiant and brave and all that good stuff because everybody else in the kingdom sucked.
Adults at the time were probably more likely willing to do something like Infocom, right? Read user adventure like a book. But to kids, to anyone younger who is getting into computers, the wow factor of the graphics combined with the ease of like navigating something you can actually see quickly put them on the map.
It was actually the precursor to the King's Quest games, which really got Sierra popular.
This is what Sierra gave to the gaming world. This could not be overlooked. Adventure games, graphic adventure games, and these would, dominate the computer gaming market for the next 15 years. Space Quest, King's Quest, Police Quest.
I'm not even gonna imagine a world without this game. It's sad.
So that's very important that they had the first graphics in a computer game, and that cannot be understated how important that was. And Sierra was a company at first.
Good guy, Sierra.
Arcade Break.
Berzerk.
Berzerk was legit, okay? Like, I remember playing this game and it was crazy hard.
You walk around, you shoot robots, and you progress to the next room.
Arm goes like that.
Yeah.
Enemy robots could kill each other by shooting each other, running into each other, or just running into walls. Dumb AI, but it was really funny and actually really helpful to the player.
I like how you had some sort of decision to go and, you can go right into a room or down, so it wasn't totally linear. So that was cool.
The second you'd start it, someone would freaking fire at you, and
it's like, give me a second, man. I gotta get adjusted to my surroundings.
It's got one of the best video game bad guys ever created, Evil Otto, who bounces at you with a smile on his face.
You spent too long on the stage, he'd come hopping out, and it wasn't even like a long period of time. Sometimes it felt like you were on the stage for 5 seconds and that bloody thing comes hopping out.
I also really loved the voices in the game, like the destroy the humanoid.
Intruder alert, and humanoid must not escape have been sampled in so many electronic music songs that I can never forget Berzerk.
Charge, intruder, attack, kill, humanoid.
Intruder alert, intruder must not escape.
And Berzerk isn't usually talked about in the pantheon of arcade games, but it's one of the classics. It is.
And it did spawn a sequel, Frenzy.
Okay, we might talk about that a couple of years down the line.
That's why I'm not saying anything else about it.
We probably won't, but it's probably not important enough to, but we'll see.
It still has Evil Otto.
Okay.
Now it's time for the other arcade games of 1980.
Hey guys, I'm Pixel Dan, and this is the other arcade games of 1980. Crazy Climber, Taito's skyscraper climbing game, and the precursor to the platformer genre. Armor Attack, the vector graphics tank and helicopter shooter. Extra Bases, Midway's trackball baseball game. Star Castle, it's a monochrome vector-based game that got its colors from plastic transparent screen overlays. So there you go, guys. That's the other arcade games of 1980. Hope you got a pocket full of quarters.
Continue.
Another company that was founded in 1980, very influential, is Broderbund. Broderbund? I'm still not exactly sure how to pronounce it, with that O with the thing in the thing.
And the company was actually called Broderbund internally to begin with, even though it eventually became known as Broderbund because it sounds better. It doesn't sound like some sort of weird cummerbund beer mixture, Broderbund.
All I know is that for most of my life I pronounced it Borderbound because I'm an idiot.
So Broderbund was started by brothers Doug and Gary Carlston in Eugene, Oregon.
Broderbund, they now had something called like strategy games that they were big on.
Now the first of their games was Galactic Empire, one of Doug's games that he developed as a lawyer and released in 1980, originally for the TRS-80 microcomputer from Radio Shack.
The company started out with Galactic Empire, and then later was known for a lot of its kind of educational series, or at least thought-provoking series.
It was a real-time strategy space empire game where the goals were pretty modest. You just take over the entire friggin' universe within 999 years, you know. No big deal, just take over everything that exists.
Broderbund sounds like a piece of clothing, like, oh shit, my Broderbund is showing.
Or it's something that could potentially be riddled with tumors.
Yes.
I remember when I was a kid, Sun Tzu's Ancient Art of War, where you had your units, you controlled how their formations you controlled. You had barbarians, you had archers or knights, you had fortresses, and so they expanded the idea of a game.
Dr. Scholl's makes something for Broderbunds.
Carmen Sandiego. The whole Carmen Sandiego series is probably what it's most famous for developing, although it also published Myst and Riven.
Galactic Empire was followed shortly by Galactic Trader and Galactic Revolution, which was actually the precursor to the 4X subgenre of strategy games. So yeah, you have games that came later like Master of Orion that owe a heck of a lot to the Galactic series of games.
Sadly, Broderbund was bought by the Learning Company in 1998, and then through a series of unfortunate events, wound up having its workforce slashed in half by the Learning Company, and then got bought, and then they got bought, and then bought, and now basically all of the Broderbund assets are under the Ubisoft umbrella. So, vive la France, I guess.
Next stage.
Missile Command. A game where you command missiles, you do not ask them politely. Missiles simply do not respond to polite requests. You have to command them. And the designer of the game, Dave Toyrer, knew this.
Missile Command, in my opinion, is probably, safe to say, Mike, hit me if I'm wrong, the first survival horror game.
Pretty much right.
I mean, it was the first game that arguably dealt with the conflict in the 80s between the Soviet Union and the United States.
I know when I played the game, I pictured the bad guys as the Russians.
Yeah.
The original levels in Missile Command were supposed to represent 6 cities in California. Well, that was the original intent anyway. The original intent, right.
While the game's designer Dave Toyrer was creating the game, he was haunted by nightmares of major cities being nuked, just like in the game. Let's hope it was just a nightmare and not a premonition.
I actually played the game first on the Atari 2600, and all of that bleak war stuff based in reality was gone. I mean, you had like Zardon and Krytal, sci-fi alien planets that were warring with each other. Who wants that, man?
Each city had its own individual stock of missiles, and you had to calculate who's going to hit missile first, and this and that.
Bombarding us with nuclear missiles, and it's only me and a trackball.
And then those bloody things that would go beep, 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 flash down from the top, and never hit those stupid things.
You just have to think quick if you want to stay on top of things. It's essentially, you can't win the game, it's to see how far you can go.
It's fast-paced, it's very colorful, the graphics on it, just the shots of the missiles going up. There's some strategy involved, which silo you're going to shoot out to hit what. There's missiles that split apart when they come down. Oh, I love it. It's very difficult but very fun.
Missile Command's controlled with the trackball. Now, I know I've complained a lot about trackballs in the past, but it actually makes sense to me in this game. Anytime you gotta move a cursor around, I'd prefer a trackball to a joystick. Moving a cursor around with a joystick is like using an Etch-a-Sketch to draw anything really.
The thing that really sticks with me about Missile Command is that if you're in one of those enclosed cabinets where you're sitting down and it's just really dark, there's only one, you can only come in the one side and the other side's closed off, and you have the speakers right here.
There's no music. It's just the imminent threat of you not able to save all of these various cities from being completely vaporized.
You feel like you're in like a Cold War bunker and World War III is raining down upon you, and it's your job to stop the Soviets from decimating your country.
My favorite appearance of Missile Command of all time in pop culture is when Eddie Furlong plays it in the arcade in Terminator 2.
Yes.
Before he plays Afterburner.
Yeah. which is a better game, arguably.
My favorite part of Missile Command is losing because it's got the best ending screen ever. It just says the end, and it's bright and red and goes and it's global thermonuclear war, and it's awesome.
Now that's how you say hasta la vista, baby.
Rogue. Yeah, one of the few games to have an entire genre named after it. It's like Primus. You know, they're the band, like what kind of genre are they? They're Primus, man. You can't describe them as anything else. Rogue? Yeah, they're roguelikes.
We call them platformers. We don't call them Super Mario RPGers. Likes.
Rogue is basically the granddaddy of all hack and slash and dungeon crawling games.
It was kind of like an action RPG using ASCII characters, ASCII art, you know, which is a great throwback. I just love that.
It's all text. Everything from your character to the monsters to the corridors are represented by various ASCII characters and letters and numbers.
But there was this whole random element, the procedurally generated dungeons and the fighting and the monsters and everything.
Anytime you played the game again, there was going to be a set of randomly designed levels. So it was different every single time.
It was the perfect alternative for a dork who couldn't D&D with his friends on a game night. He could load the game up and the computer would play Dungeon Master for him.
Roguelikes, that's one of those terms that really hasn't died out.
Games like Diablo, hugely influenced by Rogue. Phantasy Star Online, Monster Hunter.
Heck yeah, Rogue, being awesome, ahead of the curve, roguelike.
Arcade Breaks.
Tempest. Actually, this is the game my brother used to play constantly in the arcades. I used to follow him in the arcades and watch him play Tempest.
The Tempest cabinet itself was beautiful. The purple colors, it was almost like blacklit almost. It was just really nice, and that's one of the machines I always wanted to own, was a Tempest machine.
Tempest was initially designed to be a first-person perspective Space Invaders.
And it was also one of the first games to use Atari's new vector color display, which was huge at the time and is a big component to that game, because one of the neatest things about that game is the damn color in that game. It looks really cool.
It was sort of like foreshadowing like 3D and the way the colors moved, and I just didn't even hardly know how to play the game. I just like to see it move around. So I'm not even sure, I couldn't even tell you how to play the game or what the object was.
You're a little geometric shape.
You're a ship.
You're a ship.
In space, probably.
Cool space though, tunnel space.
Sweet space, yes.
And you spin around in a circle and you shoot at enemies that come at you. 3D that come at you.
And it also uses a spinner.
That's right. A dial spinner. You just whip that bad boy and go around the tubes.
It was probably, when you think about vector-based games, that Tempest really took advantage of it fully, because you had great color, true 3D, and it was a blast. It's just unfortunate that, you know, no console or computer at the time could handle a port of the game.
Now, the gaming innovation of 1980.
Oh, hello. This is Rue for the gaming innovation of 1980. What new technology graced the world and changed the face of gaming forever? Space Panic was made by Universal, and is generally considered the first platform game. In it, you had a little man in red scrambling up and down ladders in order to avoid aliens. While not the most popular arcade game, one could certainly see the potential. Maybe by adding a jumping mechanic or Big Monkey. That does it for the gaming innovation of 1980. Be sure to come back for 1981, and don't forget, it's not just nostalgia, it's science. Oh look, I solved it.
Now, the forgotten video games of 1980.
Pat here, bringing you the forgotten video games of 1980. Steelworker, Taito's cute survival puzzle game. Targ, XCD's gaudy maze shooter which made people's eyes bleed. Space Trek, Sega's shooter that ripped off every space franchise in existence. And Radar Scope, a failed space shooter put out by Nintendo, who soon left the video game market forever. And those were the forgotten video games of 1980. Just because you don't remember them doesn't mean they weren't fun.
Next level. Game Watch. Game Watch.
The Game & Watch series of games were created by Gunpei Yokoi, who is most famous for creating the Game Boy.
Yep.
He's not famous for creating the Virtual Boy.
He came up with the idea for the Game & Watch when he was on a Shinkansen or Japanese bullet train and he saw a businessman that was just bored playing with their LCD calculator. He decided to come up with a device that would not only tell the time, but allow you to kill time by playing video games at the same time.
You have to understand, in the 1980s, digital watches were becoming huge, right? Like everybody was wearing digital watches with the liquid crystal display readouts. So he looked at that and he thought, this exact same technology as it is right now could totally be a gaming system, and we can make little handheld video games out of this.
It's very small, very sleek. So it's very lightweight, you can carry it in your pocket.
First one was just one screen, a little LCD screen, black and white, that you'd play on. And then they had multiple screens on them, etc.
Very simple, your left and right buttons. You select your game A, game B, different modes for your game, and then of course you've got your clock settings. So you can set your alarm, you can set your time.
Each one contains one game and a watch with an alarm built into it. So you can technically put this on your bedside table and have it go off in the morning.
Not sure if anyone ever did that, by the way. I'm not sure anyone did that.
I don't know anyone who ever did.
Even the design of the games themselves, I mean, they created the D-pad.
He's like, okay, well, if we have this thing shaped like a cross, you know, and then you push on it with your thumb, and that's going to control the character just like a joystick, but it's going to work, you know, in tandem with this portable gaming device, and that's where we got the D-pad from. You know, so many really, really interesting innovations happening at that time, just out of total necessity.
So Nintendo really raised the bar when it came to handhelds. You know, first you had the LEDs, you know, you had by companies like, you know, Coleco.
A blip.
Or Mattel.
You imagined it.
And then all of a sudden, now it's like you can see characters on here. You can see animation, rudimentary, but it's there.
We used to have like this, you know, the Mattel little LED light games, and then someone walks in to school with one of those.
That's like a kid with a Neo Geo.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like.
The Game & Watches were released in series, the first being the Silver Series, and the very first game in the Silver Series, and the very first Game & Watch ever made was called Ball.
It's ingenious in its simplicity. It's just a guy juggling balls. Get your mind out of the gutter.
So there's tons of these different games. Some of my favorites would be Octopus and Parachute. I love the dual screen Zelda one. It's legitimately still fun to play. I have it on my bedside table, not as an alarm, but I just pick it up and I play it.
Yeah, when you look at the Zelda Game & Watch, it literally looks like a DS. I mean, they brought back the dual screens and it was definitely a throwback to the early Game & Watches.
シガレットケース No! ゲームウォッチマルチスクリーン上下2つのスクリーンで1つのゲーム下から上へ上から下へマルチに展開ドンキーコング
Game & Watch was very prolific in Japan, and there were a lot of different variations. I mean, from the dual screen versions to the single screen versions to even transparent versions that you could see through, and larger tabletop versions as well.
And before they had their own console in the US, your exposure to characters like Donkey Kong or the Mario Brothers, if it wasn't in an arcade, the only way to see them was on a Game & Watch. So that can't be understated either.
These were a huge success for Nintendo. This got them started into really focusing on video games.
And what it turned out was it was a great opportunity for them to develop the channel, with all the distribution channel, with the consumer marketers in the US, so that when the NES came along, the 8-bit system, they already had a relationship that was ready to go.
It led to the development of more arcade games.
This LCD video game was so successful that, of course, some of these other companies started getting in on the mix, and later on down the line, we started seeing companies like Tiger Electronics follow suit by making these little single-game handheld LCD video games.
Gunpei Yokoi is the man who really revolutionized the way handheld gaming would be for 30 plus years.
It's technical genius.
And sadly, Gunpei Yokoi died in a tragic car accident in the late 90s. So though he's gone, his legacy lives on.
Arcade Break.
Warlords has to be one of my favorite Atari arcade games of all time. It's a mix between Breakout and Quadrupong.
You have up to 4 players in 4 corners of the screen, and you defend your castle with basically a pong paddle.
You would kind of volley what was supposed to be, I believe, a fireball from a dragon back and forth, and you would break each other's walls to eventually get to the center of each castle, and once that center was hit, that player would be out of the game.
There's 2 different arcade cabinets that came out for it. The first one, the more common one, is a sit-down cocktail Warlords arcade cabinet, really cool. And the second one is a stand-up one. The stand-up is one of my favorite ones because it appears almost in 3D. Atari did a really cool job of reflecting the image off of a mirror, and the reflection would actually make the image appear in 3D. Very, very cool.
It reminds me of like an early, very simple version of Rampart. It's something, you know, very simple to get behind.
And really, when you think about Pong or Breakout games that aren't Pong or Breakout, there's only 2 you really think of. You think of Arkanoid and you think of Warlords.
Next level.
Infocom really got started because of Zork.
You had a bunch of guys at MIT, including most famously Mark Blank, Dave Liebling, who coded this game over the course of 3 years, finally ready to come out in 1980.
During development, they were calling the game Zork because at MIT it was just a hacker slang term for an unfinished program, so it was a Zork as it was being developed.
They initially programmed it on a PDP-10 mainframe computer. Huge game on this mainframe computer at MIT, but in 1980 they were ready to distribute to the world, to the personal computers out there. But the game was too big.
Even though it had this virtual memory system that was really revolutionary, it still wasn't enough to plop the whole game onto one single floppy disk for home PCs like the TRS-80 and the Apple II and such. So they split the game up from the beginning as Zork 1, 2, and 3.
Zork was kind of derivative from the original interactive fiction game. By interactive fiction, I mean text on a screen, telling you a story, and it's an adventure, and it's almost like a choose your own adventure.
Text adventures were nothing new at this point. When Zork came out, there was Adventure, Colossal Cave.
Infocom, which came out with Zork and all the other Zorks, and a bunch of other interactive fiction games. That's what Infocom was known for, interactive fiction.
They also had an incredible text parser that would let you use almost complete sentences. So instead of hit Pat, it could be hit Pat with mighty fist, and it would understand it.
Zork was a blockbuster, okay? You had games like Ultima or Wizardry that sold dozens of thousands of copies, and they were huge. Zork, by the mid-'80s, had sold hundreds of thousands of copies. That's unheard of.
They were the masters of the text adventure. I mean, they started out with games like Zork and then took the text adventure out of the realm of fantasy into just every single genre imaginable. You know, you name it, whether it was things like, you know, Suspect, which was a murder mystery kind of thing, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
They even had adult titles like Leather Goddesses of Phobos, so kind of like a sex text adventure.
Yeah, so they had a 10-year run where they were just pumping these babies out.
When Infocom got big and started to box their titles, they loaded them full of cool stuff.
Yes.
They called them feelies.
Like, so if you got, you know, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you got all these little manuals and scraps of paper, and sometimes there were actual items, like in Zork Trilogy, there was a Zork Mid coin, an actual coin out of metal that they cast, and they included in every copy of the game.
Leather Goddesses of Phobos actually has some scratch and sniff cards. One of them, if I remember correctly, is pleather, which is pretty hilarious.
The idea was, okay, well, you've got a text adventure, you've got to use your imagination for these graphics, but let's give people something out of the world of the game, some piece of thing brought out of the fiction that they can hold in their hands. And of course, you needed them to play the game, but something, you know, that they can hold in their hands that would sort of like enhance the feeling of being in this world.
You always got good writing, and you got really high quality programming at the time. You couldn't beat them for adventure games.
It was like a supernova. It was, you know, shining really brightly and then just petered out.
And the biggest thing to take away from the whole Zork experience is to stay the frick out of the dark.
It is pitch black. You are likely to be eaten by a grue.
They're awful. They're gonna eat you and such. You were likely to be eaten by a grue.
May the force be with you only gets you so far. You gotta use you are likely to be eaten by a grue to get to that sub-geek level. Then you get your pocket protector and your Rubik's Cube. That's how it works.
Arcade Break.
It's a maze game, a lot like Pac-Man. And the difference is you weren't confined to a single screen. The maze actually scrolled.
The point of Rally X was to collect flags and avoid rocks and drunk drivers.
The interesting thing about Rally X, despite the fact that it's just bright, colorful, and kind of fun to play, is it's kind of an early usage of radar. There's actually a radar on the screen that shows you where flags, and I believe the special flag will show you where the cars are.
One of the very first games to feature bonus rounds, where essentially you had to capture all the flags before your opponent did.
Or as it was called, a challenging stage. Come on, challenging? Everyone knows challenging is spelled with 2 R's.
And it also had background music, which was unheard of at the time.
It's a really solid game in its own right, but they put it out the same year they put out Pac-Man.
When they saw that Pac-Man had gone on to be the best-selling game of all time, they must have been amazed. I'm sorry.
Insert coin.
Sometimes I'll go over at lunch and start playing the games and miss a class after lunch or something.
Do you think that video games are going to be here to stay, or are they just a fad that's going to go away?
They'll be here to stay. I think they're going to be around for a long time. Because they say we're living in a space age, and these games are space age.
1980 was almost this sort of defining year for the rise of arcades.
Between 1980 and 1982, video game arcades had doubled in size, the peak having 13,000 video game arcades in North America alone.
I mean, arcades in the late 70s were sort of counterculture, sort of, you know, not the underbelly of society, but kind of the younger groups.
Beforehand, they were seedy. You didn't know exactly where to go. You might get stabbed in the face, touch a bodily fluid.
When they started in the early 80s, especially 1980, there were not like these scummy pool halls or anything like that. They were lights and loud noises and people generally having a great time.
Not buying drugs.
Yes.
With games like Centipede, Pac-Man, Galaxian, all of a sudden you have these colorful games and now it appeals to everyone, not just adults, now kids too.
But I would just remember loving this handful of change and going there and playing those games.
And as it dwindles, you get happier and happier for some reason. Even when it's gone, you're like, this is time that I don't need to get back.
It's hard not to just, you know, romanticize the idea of walking into a dark arcade and hear all the machines making their sounds, the pinball machines, the arcade machines.
They had like the stand-up arcade units and they had the cocktail cabinets, which were the tabletop ones, which were awesome because that one you could actually sit comfortably and play.
You like video games? You like drinking? Put them together. Get a cocktail cabinet. It's got tempered glass so you can put your drink right on the game.
Cocktail cabinets were really good for multiplayer games because the screen would switch sides for whoever's turn it was, and each player could sit on either side of the cabinet, and they were really slick looking.
You started to see cocktail tables in the fronts of restaurants and things like that. More people were exposed to games outside of arcades.
It works a whole lot better than putting your drink on an iPad. I learned that the $800 way.